Today, all Victoria is attuned to the spirit of the Empire in humble tribute to the glorious dead. At Melbourne's great Shrine of Remembrance, 250,000 people surround the majestic stone monument which enshrines the memory of Anzac. It is the greatest gathering for such a solemn purpose which the Southern Hemisphere has ever known. Here, in outward and visible form, the people of Australia express a gratitude which will never die to those who gave all they had to give. And those who come after echo the spirit of armistice. We will remember them.
This great assembly is gathered here today to do homage to the men and women of Victoria who gave their lives in the Great War and to commemorate the services rendered by all who left this state to fight for the Empire. This noble shrine, which I am invited to dedicate, has been erected as a token of our gratitude to those who fought for us. To the glory of God and in grateful memory of the men and women of this state who served in the Great War, and especially of those who fell, I dedicate this shrine.
Good morning. Welcome to the Shrine of Remembrance and the 2024 Victorian State Remembrance Day service. My name is Commander Priya Chandra and I am a Shrine Governor. We begin the Remembrance Day service with a smoking ceremony and welcome to country by Bungarong Land Council Aboriginal Corporation representatives Josh West and Danny West.
Hello. Oh, good morning. The mic is working. Womanjenka, welcome. My name's Josh West. My beautiful son Danny West starting to smoke over there. We're both proud Bunurong Palawa men. And firstly, I'd like to pay my respects. Pay my respects to the land in which we stand and meet on today. Bunurong Bumwadang land. Land of the Kulin. Land of my ancestors, land of my family. And I pay my respects to those warriors, those old people, the ones that come before us, the ones that are handed down that knowledge since creation, since Bunjil, our spirit creator, the wedge-tailed eagle, created these lands. I pay my respects to all elders across this great nation that are past, the present elders we have in community, and our young, strong brothers and sisters, our next leaders. And we gather here today on the sacred lands. We gather in respect, we gather in remembrance. Remembrance for those diggers, for those warriors, for all those families that we lost, the ones that are left behind, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the triumphs. And I pay my respect to all cultures we have here today, non-Indigenous, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, and all the families we have here today, all the diggers we have here today, all the soldiers, the men, women, and children. And this sacred, significant day that we all gather together to remember those lives, to remember the strength and the honour we had to give this country what it is today. So Womanjenka, welcome to the lands of the Bunurong people. Let's all take a couple of seconds and just remember those lives we lost. My son, he's got this beautiful smoking ceremony, cleansing ceremony, a cultural ceremony. It's been passed down for thousands and thousands and thousands of generations, still practiced today. We cleanse this area. We get rid of any negative energy, any bad spirits, and to welcome you guys to our country. So you can walk that clear path on our country. With, like I said, no negative energy, no bad spirits. I'm holding our 3 sacred leaves, plants. The first one, our manigum, represents our community. A mother tree, food tree, tool tree. The next one, our black wattle, represents our warriors, our elders. Another men's tree, tool tree, medicine tree. The sap from this tree, we suck on that sap. Arthritis, rheumatism. Really good for our stomachs. Any sores inside our bodies, that will clear it up. The sap's also a binding agent for our tools, our spears. And our last one, our cherry balat tree, our bup tree, our children tree. The reason it represents our children is it needs a host tree to grow, a mother tree to grow. Cannot propagate it, will not grow on its own. The seed gets dropped, picked up by a wallaby, bird, goes through the stomach acid, passed out, and will find that mother tree. We'll feed off the roots of that tree. And just like our children need the parent tree to grow big and strong, then it lets go. Produces a beautiful red cherry. The only cherry with a stone on the outside. Holds the most sugar out of any plant on our land. The whole plant is edible. The sap from this tree, we used to use it for snake bite. So another medicine tree, tool tree, plant tree. These 3 sacred trees fused in this fire is the Bunurong Bumwadang way. The Bunurong smell. We could identify this smell as our own smell. And like I said, this sacred ceremony passed down for thousands of years. When our bupups, our children are born, we put them through that smoke for protection, for strength. We wipe that smoke on their lips, keep their language strong, on their murup, on their spirit, to connect them to dreaming, to the old people. And we do underneath their feet to connect them to country. So Wamajenka, everybody. Wamajenka, Warialea, welcome everyone. Friends to Bunurong country. Please tread lightly. Walk softly on her. My uncle Japananga, Errol West, an Indigenous philosopher, he wrote, "Walk softly on the land," as it holds the stories of our grandmothers. You think about that quote. Holds those ancient stories, our ancient history, this country's ancient history. So embrace that history. Be proud. We have the oldest living culture in the world. So again, Ngujin, thank you. Nikki, take care. And just remember while we're here to remember those diggers, those families, the ones that are lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh and Danny. On this day, the 11th of November, we come together at this place to continue the unbroken tradition of remembrance for the service and sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of Australians in wars past and present. We are joined by many distinguished guests, including members of the Victorian and Australian governments, consuls representing nations across the world, and representatives of the current, serving and veteran community. I make special mention of the Honourable Jacinta Allan, Premier of Victoria, and Senator Raf Ciccone, representing the Prime Minister of Australia. Today marks the anniversary of the armistice, which was the agreement that ended fighting in the First World War. At 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918, fighting in Western Europe ceased. For a time, the world knew peace. This day marks 106 years since that day. On this Remembrance Day 2024, we come together to honour the service and sacrifice of all Victorians and Australians who have served in war, conflict, peacemaking and peacekeeping. To express our gratitude to those who gave their all to secure our future and to recognise their humanity, their courage, fortitude and dedication. Service and sacrifice continue in the actions of the more than 40,000 members of the Australian Defence Force who have engaged in war and warlike operations this century in East Timor, Iraq and Afghanistan. We remember those who served in Bougainville, East Timor and the Solomon Islands, as well as in many international peacekeeping operations. We remember that Australian servicemen and women have also served in humanitarian and disaster relief at home and abroad. We also remember how the grief, heartache, pride and love that is felt by the families of the more than 60 members of the Australian Defence Force who have lost their lives in service since the year 2000 is the same as that felt by families 106 years ago. We remember the families of veterans who struggled to reconcile the loss of their loved ones to suicide. We remember the service and sacrifice of more than 400,000 Victorians who have served and who continue to serve. And we contemplate the impact of today's wars on the people of Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Sudan and Ukraine, as well as in multiple other conflict zones. This year marks 90 years of Remembrance Day at the Shrine. Every year since 1934, the Victorian public has come together at the Shrine to pause, reflect and remember lives lost and changed forever. Furthermore, this Remembrance Day 2024 marks the 90th anniversary of the Shrine of Remembrance itself. In the years following the end of the Great War in 1918, an appropriate memorial to all those who had served the nation was a hotly debated topic. Should it be a practical structure, such as a hospital, a school or a bridge, or would a symbolic memorial be more appropriate? Many Victorians wanted a place where they could come together to remember their loved ones and the sacrifices they had made. The final decision was that a symbolic memorial, a gathering place, was the best option. Following an architectural competition, the winning design was chosen, and from 1927 to 1934, construction took place. On Remembrance Day 1934, 300,000 people, almost 1/3 of Melbourne's then population, gathered on this site to witness the dedication of the Shrine of Remembrance and to collectively reflect on and grieve Australian service and sacrifice in the First World War. In the 9 decades since, the Shrine has been the focus of commemoration and remembrance in Victoria, and in the process has become a foundation stone of the Victorian community. That community encompasses all those who have been touched by war and conflict over the years. The Shrine's engagement with the Victorian community extends beyond the large ceremonies such as Remembrance Day and Anzac Day to include more than 180 commemorative services every year. The involvement of ex-service organisations such as the RSL and Legacy, among others, is central to commemoration at the Shrine, while close connections to current serving members of the Australian Defence Force are also critical. As time passes and the generations that experienced the First and Second World Wars leave us, it is up to those of us who remain to ensure that remembrance and commemoration live on. By being here today, you assist with this important obligation. Today's ceremony is generously supported by the Australian Defence Force. We are joined by the Royal Australian Air Force Band, the Australian Army 2nd 10th Battery 9th Regiment and a Tri-Service Half Guard party. I now invite the Half Guard to march on. The Governor of Victoria, Her Excellency Professor the Honourable Margaret Gardner AC, is now arriving. Her Excellency is escorted by Captain Stephen Bowater, Chair of the Shrine of Remembrance Trustees, the Honourable Jacinta Allen, Premier of Victoria, and Victorian Senator the Honourable Raf Ciccone, representing the Prime Minister. Please be upstanding for the arrival of the Governor, which will be acknowledged with a royal salute. Please be seated. Observing tradition, the Governor will now inspect the Guard. The Governor will now make her way to the sanctuary within the Shrine Monument. You will be able to watch proceedings in the sanctuary on the screens either side of the shrine. A catafalque party will soon form. The catafalque party are sentries who guard the symbolic grave of our deceased veterans. Today's catafalque party comprises members of the Victoria Police Shrine Guard. Shrine Guard, catafalque party, take post. In the sky towards the city, the Royal Australian Air Force roulettes are approaching and will pass over the shrine in tribute to Remembrance Day. They will be returning later in the service, flying east to west. If you are able, I invite you to please stand as we commence the ceremonial part of today's service. The Governor of Victoria, Her Excellency Professor the Honourable Margaret Gardner AC, will now lay a wreath at the Stone of Remembrance on behalf of the people of Victoria. I now invite Mr. Brett West to place his wreath on behalf of all those he served alongside. Brett West will now proceed to the lectern to recite the Ode of Remembrance. Immediately following the ode, bugle calls and gunfire will announce the start and the end of the 1-minute silence commencing at 11 a.m. If you are able, please remain standing throughout.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Please be seated. The Royal Australian Air Force Roulettes in their Pilatus PC-21 aircraft are again flying over the shrine in tribute to Remembrance Day. The Royal Australian Air Force Band and the Australian Children's Choir will now perform Lead Kindly Light, a song which was also performed at the inauguration of the shrine in 1934. Thank you, Australian Children's Choir and Royal Australian Air Force Band, for that moving performance. I now invite Shrine Young Ambassador Matthew Threlfall to recite In Flanders Fields.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from flailing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
I now invite Her Excellency, the Governor of Victoria, to present the Remembrance Day address.
The Honourable Jacinta Allen, Premier of Victoria, Senator Ref Ciccione, representing the Prime Minister, the Honourable Natalie Suleiman, Minister for Veterans, John Pasuto, Leader of the Opposition, Members of State and Federal Parliament, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor Nicholas Rees, Captain Stephen Bowater, Chair and Trustees of the Shrine of Remembrance, Commissioners and Senior Public Servants, Senior Officers of the Australian Defence Force, members of the Consular Corps, former and current servicemen and women, and all distinguished guests. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, the Boonwurrung Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge past and present members of the Australian Defence Force with us today, and to thank you for your service. More than 60,000 Australians were killed overseas during World War I. Only 2 of those Australians were brought home for burial. Major General William Throsby Bridges, shot by a sniper at Gallipoli, was buried at Duntroon. The other Anzac, the unknown soldier, is buried at the Australian War Memorial. The power of the unknown soldier stems from their anonymity. He could be any one of the 60,000 who fell. He could be Fred or Arthur Rogash from Rainbow. The loyalty of the 2 brothers were questioned when they enlisted because their father was German. But they signed up on the same day and fought together in the 21st Battalion, and they died on the same day. The unknown soldier could also be Maurice or Ilias Christie, 2 brothers from Woodend who also enlisted together and fought together in the 21st and died on the same day. Or the unknown soldier could be any one of the thousands of names inscribed on more than 1,000 memorials built and lovingly maintained across our state. The inscription at the foot of the tomb of the unknown soldier reads, "He is all of them and he is one of us." That inscription begs the question, if he is one of us, who are we? It's a question of identity that Charles Bean, the official historian of the Anzacs, was still grappling with after the First World War in 1942. 1942 was the year the last volume of the official history of Australia in World War I was published. That volume, about World War I, told the story of the last 6 months of the war on the Western Front, including the armistice. The timing of the publication is important because 1942 was Australia's darkest hour. 1942 was the year the Philippines and Singapore fell, the year Darwin was bombed, the year Sydney Harbour was attacked, the year the Battle of the Kokoda Track raged back and forth. In 1942 then, Bean was not writing for the benefit of history. He was writing for the benefit of our spirit, of the people's spirit at that time. He was attempting to rouse a nation. He wanted to remind his fellow Australians what they shared. Their shared history, shared identity, shared destiny. Perhaps that's why, in its closing pages, he told how 2 Anzac regiments were dispatched to Gallipoli immediately after the armistice. At Gallipoli, Bean wrote, they joined in the holy task of locating the graves of fallen Anzacs. He wrote, the 6 weeks they spent upon Gallipoli was a season of deep interest to all ranks. All, or nearly all, the officers and many of the men had fought at Anzac, and they explored the old position with feelings of emotion stronger and deeper than any other battleground of the war could awaken in the hearts of Australians and New Zealanders. Bean believed Australia's self-concept as a nation was born at Gallipoli. But he did not think Australian identity was born at Gallipoli or in any of the battles that followed. Bean said this, and I quote, the qualities exhibited by Australian and New Zealand soldiers in the war were not the outcome of war. They were the product of the free, wholesome life of this country. That is why, when Australian people were facing their existential moment, Bean remained certain that liberal democracy, the freedom they enjoyed, would defeat fascism. He wrote that whatever the faults or the merits of democratic government, the freedom that it alone apparently ensures to its citizens seems to build the best soldier because it develops the whole man. We might say the whole person. In other words, our Australian collective identity was and still is bound by the freedoms that defined the Anzacs, together with the shared responsibility to defend those rights. All of which is why, 82 years on, Bean's words still ring true. As he said, because our national identity is defined not by the way we fight or where we freely differ, but what we fight for and should defend: freedom, equality, tolerance. In conclusion, let me say this. More was asked of the generation that fought and ended at the armistice than any other generation of Australians before or since. The debt we owe that generation and every other generation of servicemen and women who've served, and with us today, people who've served in Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, and on peacekeeping operations, that debt can never be repaid. That is why, in our daily lives, we must always respect and stand up for each other's freedoms, because that's what they stood for and fought for. That is why, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we must always return to this sacred place, lest we forget.
I now invite Brett West. I now invite Brett West to speak about what Commemoration and Remembrance Day mean to him. Brett served for almost 30 years in the Royal Australian Air Force as an explosives engineer, including on deployment to Southeast Asia and the Middle East. He is a proud Yamatji man from Shark Bay in Western Australia and a current member of the Victorian Veterans Council.
I would first like to thank Josh and Danny for welcoming us to their country. Thank you. And it's especially for me, being a Yamatji man, someone who's about 4,000 kilometres away from my traditional lands and waters. It's a place we call Guthaguda, known as Shark Bay, on the northern central coast of Western Australia. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to Her Excellency, the Honourable Professor Margaret Gardner AC, Senator Ralph Ciccone, the Honourable Jacinta Allen, Mr John Picciuto, the Honourable Natalie Suleiman, and other distinguished guests. While today marks the day in 1918 when the Western Front fell silent after 4 years of continuous fighting, when we remember those of whom we have lost as they were protecting our nation, I would like to share with you what Remembrance Day means to me. Today is a day of reflection when I remember my 3 decades of service, where I'd served over that time, whom I'd served with, both those that are still with us and those that are unfortunately past. I remember both the good times and the bad, and I reflect on what I've learnt and what I would do again, and what I would definitely never repeat. I acknowledge and pay my respects to all those who have served our country. More importantly, being an Aboriginal veteran, I remember the reason I first joined, to serve and protect country, both Australia and my traditional lands and waters. I further reflect on those who served before me as I stand on the shoulders of giants. Those Indigenous servicemen and women who joined despite having legislation, rules and regulations that prohibited them from serving, they carved the pathway for people like myself, gave us the opportunity to wear the uniform, to protect and serve. There are those who excelled in their service careers, the likes of Reg Saunders, one of the first Aboriginal commissioned officers who served in World War II in Korea, and Len Waters, the first Aboriginal fighter pilot who flew Kitty Hawks, most notably one known as Black Magic. I acknowledge and pay my respects to all my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters who have worn the uniform. And most importantly, I reflect on the strength and sacrifice of all the loved ones of those who serve. For me, my wife and children, without their love and support, I would never have been able to do what I needed to do, especially my wife, who not only supported me, but kept the home front going, provided all the love and support for our children while I was not there to provide, kept things as normal as possible, allowing me to concentrate on what I was doing and allowing me to return to a household that like I'd never been away. For all those who have served, that's all you ask when you return, is some sort of normality. To my extended family and close friends whose support and understanding never wavered, I acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to all the loved ones who supported all those who have served. The reflections I have are sometimes shared with those who have served and understand. Some are shared with those who have never served but are interested. Some are quiet, private reflections, allowing me to further unpack my service life and how I've come to be where I am today. I encourage all of you to take a moment of reflection today, and if you're at a loss where you may be able to do this 90-year-old building behind me may be a good place to start, lest we forget.
The wreaths will now be laid. Please come forward once I have announced your name to place your wreath. To begin, I invite the Honourable Jacinta Allen, Premier of Victoria. Senator Ralph Ciccone, representing the Prime Minister of Australia. members of Victorian State and Federal Parliament, and the Lord Mayor. Commodore Greg York, Major General Jason Blaine and Group Captain Lloyd Selleck to lay wreaths as well. The Chairperson, Victorian Multicultural Commission, and the Assistant Secretary, Victoria, Department of Veterans Affairs. The Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, Fire Rescue Commissioner and representative of Ambulance Victoria. The Consular Corps, representing other nations. Members of Veterans Associations, including State Senior Vice President, RSL Victoria, and President and Chair, Melbourne Legacy. I now invite representatives of the Australian Air Force Cadets and Shrine Young Ambassadors to lay wreaths representing the school students of Victoria. And anyone else among us who wishes to lay a floral tribute on the steps, you may do so now. In the concluding part of our service, the Royal Australian Air Force Band will play Advance Australia Fair, supported by the Australian Children's Choir. Immediately following the anthem, a flock of pigeons will be released from the balcony, just as they were at the opening of the shrine on Remembrance Day 1934. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the Australian National Anthem performed by the Air Force Band. Let the pigeons fly in symbolic expression of our shared hope for enduring peace. We thank the nephews of able seaman Teddy Sheehan VC, Jerry and Ed Sheehan, and David and Sydney McMeekin for providing the pigeons for this tribute. This brings us to the conclusion of today's Remembrance Day service. Please remain standing for the departure of Her Excellency, the Governor of Victoria. The Governor will be accorded a royal salute as she leaves. Thank you. Please be seated. The Guard will now march off. The ceremony has now concluded. The sanctuary will open shortly and you may view the natural ray of light from 12 midday. We thank the Victorian Office for Veterans for supporting today's service. We also thank the Royal Australian Navy, Australian Army, the Royal Australian Air Force, Victoria Police and the Shrine Guard for their support. We thank Brett West, Josh West and Danny West, Shrine Young Ambassador Matthew Threlfall, the Royal Australian Air Force Band and the Australian Children's Choir for their participation. And we thank you for joining us today here at the Shrine and online. Thank you for taking this moment to pause and reflect on this day when we recall the fragile joy of peace at war's end. Finally, in joining us for this service, you have participated in giving remembrance. Thank you for your support. On behalf of the Shrine Trustees, good day.